Hello everyone, Alistair Gold here. Thought I'd wear something a little bit brighter this time. Last time I wore a t-shirt that people said that kind of blended in with the sofa. Just ended up looking like a floating head, which is always strange. I had a little bit of kind of spare time as my wife is currently out doing on a work trip at the theatre with various work colleagues. So I thought, okay, got a bit of spare time. And I was going to kind of talk about the midfielders. I did a video a couple of weeks back, maybe even a week back, where I spoke about potential strikers in the transfer window. And I thought I'll do one on the midfielders. It ended up as being quite topical because we've just found out that one of the midfielders that Spurs have been looking at looks to be off the radar now. Well, on the radar, but off the table is probably the best. Do you have a radar at a table? I don't know. And having just started this, or just before I started it, Italy have just gone out of the Euros. So at least we know, while very disappointing on a personal level for Guillermo Vicario, he is going to get a proper holiday and should be back in good time for a pre-season tour, I would imagine. They get about 3 weeks off. What are we on date-wise? 29th. Yeah, should get enough time to then be on the pre-season tour. So small positives to take out of that for Vicario. I'm sure he's ecstatic at that. But yeah, I thought I'd talk about midfielders. Obviously, there's going to be a fair bit of change in that department this summer. I should stress this is going to be a shorter video as well. That's kind of my plan. Is with everything changing so quickly, a video is probably likely to be very much out of date within 48 hours. So my thinking is maybe over the next kind of month or two, certainly next month before the fixtures really kick in, maybe even before the tour gets in because that is manic as well, is to try to do more regular but shorter videos. And hopefully that works. Look, there's going to be many things that happen. I mean, I wrote a piece today about Leeds because I was speaking to some various people about it, and some of the players at Spurs, there's an interest in at Leeds. And obviously, there's been a couple of players at Leeds who was interested. I thought, I'll do that. And within literally about 5-6 hours of me starting it or publishing it, there was some of it that was out of date already. And that's just the transfer window, the way it's going to work. It really is. So yes, there's going to be changes. There's going to be one department where I think we'll see maybe the most change, potentially, in terms of people that are going out the door. Obviously, we already had Tanguy Ndombele's head out the door. Hojbjerg and Lo Celso probably going to go out the door this summer as well. So that means, he's going to need Postecoglou fresh, and he wants fresh faces and energy and impetus within his style of play to supplement the likes of James Maddison, Yves Bissouma, Rodrigo Bentancur, Pat Matasar, Oliver Skipp potentially. We'll talk about Oliver Skipp a little bit later. And Dejan Kulusevski, of course, can play in those deeper central roles. Sorry, I should stress central midfield if I didn't say that at the top. That's what we're talking about here. Obviously, Lucas Bergvall arrives next week as his £8.5 million move from Djurgården goes through. It's technically gone through, but officially it becomes a thing on July the 1st. He becomes a player of Tottenham Hotspur. So he will have young Bergvall there as one of his options. Essentially, Postecoglou and Johan Lange. Well, it starts off with Johan Lange. Postecoglou will say, here are a couple of players that I really like. Is there any chance we can get them? And Johan Lange will go off with his chief scout, Rob McKenzie, and his head of football insights, Frederick Leth, the number cruncher. And they will put together a list for Postecoglou as well, which will include, of course, ones that he will have thought about as well. It's all about availability and various many things, because there are so many players that obviously clubs would want, but they're not available. Or they're not interested. Sometimes players are just not interested. Again, another point that we're going to come into as well. Because don't forget, midfield is going to be that area where it needs 3 bodies at least in there just for any starting 11. But then you're going to have Europa League, 8 group games at least this season. And you're going to have, of course, the Premier League and the domestic cups, where hopefully they go a little bit further than they have in previous seasons, certainly last season. So one player we now know is not on that midfield shortlist, or he was, but he's no longer in the maybe we can get him column, is Archie Gray at Leeds United. You'd heard me spoken about young Archie before, 18-year-old, very, very talented young, essentially a central midfielder, but has been playing as a right back for much of last season for Leeds, very effectively as well. So lots of top clubs circling around Archie Gray, but it looks like Brentford have won that battle, or certainly seem to be in the driving seat. From what I understand, it looks like that deal is going to be pushed through now. I think it's £35 million, but potentially rising to around 40, seems to be the suggestion. I think his medical's already been scheduled as well, according to the reports. So yes, Spurs, among many other top clubs in the country and in Europe, are very much keeping an eye on Archie Gray. Gareth Southgate's name-checked him as well. He is one of the brightest young talents in the country right now. And it's quite funny because this kind of gives you, I guess, a little insight maybe into how the transfer window works as well in terms of reporting it. When I was doing that little piece on Leeds earlier today, I was speaking to one of the people that I was speaking to in the writing of it. And they told me while I was writing it that 100% Archie Gray was not coming to Tottenham Hotspur. And you know the way I work, I have to fit everything second sourced. But I did think it was very kind of a clearly and quite adamant about it. And obviously now we know these hours later that they must have certainly had an inkling of where he was going. And it kind of reminded me, and if it's not the case with people out there you maybe might not know, there are actually quite a lot of secrets kept during a transfer window. We see certain people like agents out there that are such blabbermouths publicly. You kind of forget that, especially talking about agents in this scenario, what I've just gone into, or people around players, or managers of players, or whatever. They're actually, 99% of them are very, very good at essentially just keeping things close to their chest and being quite secretive, knowing that if you let something out there, sometimes a big move doesn't happen and things like that. And you've got to be very careful. And sometimes clubs can get just quite annoyed about it as well. And sometimes even a club could pull out of a deal if it becomes public. Because I guess if another comes in, it can raise the costs involved and everything. So yeah, you do find that's why it's quite difficult often to get second sources and stuff. But yeah, with Archie Gray, do you know what? I've got to be completely honest. As disappointed as I am that it doesn't look like he's going to be coming to Tottenham Hotspur because he is such a talent, I kind of really think he's been very well advised there. I do. It reminds me a little bit of the Antonio Nusa situation you might remember earlier in the year, when a player and his family and representatives all combined have decided that the option with the most game time and development, I guess immediate development, is better than just picking any big club out there. Because look, I've seen some Spurs fans not happy about it. I'm sure, very many of the other top clubs, bigger clubs, whatever you want to call them, are very annoyed about it as well. But ultimately, it kind of doesn't work like that because it's about the player. It's kind of, we forget them sometimes in all of it. I'm sorry to those who've kind of heard me mention this before, but there is very much this thing where, and myself included, media, absolutely, we do it all the time, where we will report on something and say, Spurs could move for this player, without taking any real account of whether that player actually wants that move. We all do it as fans as well. The amount of times you see someone on social media do a list of, here are the players I want, here are the players who must leave the club, and here are the values that we can get for those players. All of that is nonsense. It's part of the fun of being a football fan. I've done exactly the same myself. I've kind of worked out all of these things. But first off, the valuations are just what we decide in our head. They're not based in any reality. And when you are talking about players and who you want to bring to your club, you're kind of forgetting that very crucial aspect of, do they actually want to come? And in this aspect, Archie Gray has had everyone looking at him. Like I say, all the top clubs in the Premier League, and he has chosen Brentford. This isn't a case of any of those other clubs failing, any of them. It is a case that the project that was the best for him in this moment, for him, his family, his representatives, was Brentford. He will play most weeks for Brentford. We've got to be perfectly honest. He wouldn't have at Spurs. And we've also got to differentiate, and again, myself including this, there's sometimes when you think as a fan, and look, as Spurs fans, I'm a Spurs fan. I grew up a Spurs fan. I would always choose Spurs. Of course I would. Whenever I'm playing any game, Football Manager, FIFA, whatever, EA, FC or whatever it's called nowadays, I will always pick to be Spurs. Of course I will. But that doesn't mean the rest of the world would make that decision. And I mean, you know, he's played all season, let's say, alongside someone like Joe Rodon. If I'm Joe Rodon and Archie Gray goes, oh, what about Spurs? I'm probably going to say, maybe not. Because Joe Rodon was in that situation. Was he 21, maybe 22? I think maybe 21 when Spurs signed him from Swansea. And he made that decision of, no doubt there was probably lots of other interest in him. Maybe clubs at a different, I hate to say level because, you know, they're all Premier League clubs. But maybe with not such a big kind of name, I suppose, where maybe Joe Rodon could have gone and his career would have gone differently. And he could have played regularly week in, week out for them. And that, in hindsight, would have been the right move. But instead he went to Spurs and it didn't quite work out for him. And let's be honest, if Archie Gray needs anyone at Leeds to look at in the past, especially an 18-year-old midfielder, Jack Clarke is probably going, hello, in the background. It's just like he is the warning sign, I guess, for players, maybe Leeds players, of making that move if you're not certain you're going to quickly get regular game time. Because, yeah, poor old Jack, he just spent kind of years in the wilderness, really. Obviously, he's fantastically he's doing now. Sunderland and really rebuilt his career, and who knows, he may end up moving this this window as well. I haven't actually looked into the latest in Jack. I'll have to kind of dig about and see because Spurs do have a sell-on clause, if I remember correctly. So it does still impact Spurs. But yeah, like I say, I know some Spurs fans will be upset at that, and I put out a tweet saying about, you know, I can't really argue a decision when you're looking at regular football and all of that. And you get the usual angry types. You get people going, oh, Levy lover and all this sort of rubbish, which anyone who knows my videos and has watched my videos knows that I'm probably the most critical out of reporters about various decisions made at the top of Tottenham Hotspur. That's fine. It's just part of the rubbish you get when you do stuff like this. You put yourself, I guess, out there, don't you? As to be shot at, I suppose that's the way. Please don't shoot me. Quite literally, don't. But yeah, you can't kidnap a player and make them want to sign for you. It just doesn't work like that. You know, it's in this funny situation, football clubs, aren't they? If a bigger club comes in and signs a player that you wanted to come to your team, then it's annoying because that club, you know, why didn't you get in there first? Why didn't you have the kind of nous to get in there and sign that young talent first? And then if a smaller club gets in there, it's like, well, why didn't you kind of get in there? Why have you missed that opportunity? So you just kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. And like I say, ultimately a lot of it's down to the player. But yeah, no, it could well be that Spurs and all these elite clubs are looking again in a couple of years' time at him, and that's part of the win for Brentford, I suppose. They not only get a top player that they will use regularly now, but also in a couple of years' time, if they do need to sell him or want to sell him, then they're going to probably make double what he's worth if he continues the trajectory he's on. Yeah, fair play to him. Fair play. That is the way it goes in football. It is. So yeah, annoying one because I would have certainly loved to see him at Spurs. But yeah, Pedro Porro's right back. Pedro Porro's playing every game, and in the centre of midfield, he's probably not playing every single game either. He would have got some game time, but there's no guarantees that he would have got probably from Brentford. So yeah, I get it. But there are many others on the list as well, and maybe one that, like I say, Spurs come back to in a couple of years' time. Because it was interesting because I mentioned, didn't I? I think I spoke about it in the last video that I spoke to one of the Leeds reporters a couple of days ago, and there was a real feeling around Leeds that he wouldn't go because Archie's one of their kind of the fans' most popular players. He's got the history with his family heritage at Leeds as well. But ultimately, it's about money, and Leeds needed money. There was some talk that they've had 190 million in outstanding transfer fees that they still owed, and one of the Championship's highest wage bills. From what it seems like, this deal and a couple of others should sort them out with the profit and sustainability rules. But ultimately, when you need the money and you've got a saleable asset, that's the way it works. I was trying to look at other ones they might sell, which I think now this will give them a little bit of a cushion that they won't have to accept a lower kind of deal for them. Sorencio Somerville, of course, he's been linked with Spurs. Winger, I was looking at his stats, 21 goals and 10 assists from the left wing. Very impressive. Wilfred Nonto, I'm not even sure that's how you pronounce his surname, so apologies to everyone connected with Wilfred and himself. 20-year-old, he kind of came into the Premier League, didn't he, 18 months ago, and I think he was second half of the season. Then he went there in the winter windows, isn't he? Was it from somewhere like Basel or Zurich? I can't remember. I feel like it was a Swiss side. And he kind of did okay, caught a bit of the eye, whereas this season maybe has been a bit more kind of up and down for him. But I wonder whether any other kind of Leeds players do kind of head off this summer. I guess they've got to kind of fund new arrivals as well. So anyway, this isn't a Leeds video. I was just wondering if Spurs ended up kind of looking at either of those two players. So there you go. But other names on the list. I should stress that there will be many more on this list. Like I say, there's a lot of secrecy around not only football, but the way Spurs work and the way Johan Langer works as well, compared to his predecessor, Fabio Paratici, who was very much a more public man, let's say. Whereas Johan Langer is very much let's try and get these deals done. On the slide, that's probably not the best way to put it, but a little bit more hushed terms. So, Jacob Ramsey. I was going to say Jacob Murphy. Jacob Ramsey. He is someone that Johan Langer loves. We mentioned that. I think it was maybe right at the end of the last video I mentioned that. And Postecoglou believes he can fit his system well. But Langer is a massive fan of him. He was there, obviously. Saw his development at Villa while he was working there. He only turned 23 last month, Jacob Ramsey. Spurs made inquiries about him back in January, soon after Langer came to the club in November. He can play on the central midfield, he can play on the left of midfield, very versatile player. He's got 3 years left on his contract at Villa, and he's had just a tough season. He's missed a lot of game time this season, or last one. I think he only played 20 matches or so, but that's kind of, it's a rarity. I think some people have looked at that and thought he's injury prone. He just had a bit of a nightmare season. He had a metatarsal fracture that he aggravated. So that was the kind of 2 injuries in one. And then he had a toe injury as well. So he's, certainly had a tough time of it in the last year. But Spurs, I think, have kind of made inquiries about him. It will all be kind of mostly through representatives about just whether, I guess, that injury hit season has kind of made Villa think twice about it, because in January they were very much wanting to keep him. I think suggestions of a bid seemed a little bit premature from what I understand. It's been played down on both sides, although that was, to be fair, a couple of days ago after those initial ones, so whether anything's happened in the last couple of days, I don't know. What I do know is that the initial indications were that he was absolutely not for sale. That was that. From what I understand, the last 48 hours or so, there was a bit of a loosening in that, and that potentially a growing feeling that he could be available for between 40 and 50 million, which is a big sum. But then I guess it's quite interesting because a lot of people, when I put out an article on that yesterday, were kind of aghast at that figure. But then you've just seen Archie Gray is going for what could eventually be £40 million, and he's just spent the last season in the Championship. So Jacob Ramsey, who is, I think you need to look back to the last couple of seasons as well, when he's like 21, 22, whatever, even 20, I think would have been one of the previous ones. And he's very regularly performing in the Premier League, playing well, scoring goals as well. He's very highly rated, and he could be some player, really could. So, yeah, that kind of between 40 and 50 million is not a crazy figure. And actually, it's quite funny when you look at the differences between, again, we talk about clubs and allegiances. When I put out the story yesterday that there was this growing feeling that maybe he could be prized away for that figure, Spurs fans, or a lot of them, were saying that's far too much for him. And Villa fans were saying, "What are you talking about? He'd be way more than that." And it's just quite funny how we all see things through different eyes. But yeah, again, it is again about the player. It's one of those where I can easily say, well, that's the figure that they could get away with. And Spurs, you would think, wouldn't be even making inquiries if they didn't feel there was some chance of getting him kind of, or him wanting to come to Spurs. But again, it's a tough decision for a player. He is a Villa lad. You know, he's come through their academy. They've got Champions League football next season. Again, that there's no guarantee that he would definitely choose to come to Spurs if Villa decided, okay, we'll kind of let him head off for that kind of price. Because, yeah, that's a massive decision. I guess you could ask, speaking to some people about it, and you could argue that Villa hadn't been in the Champions League for a long time. And will this be a one-off, or what will happen? Will they continue their kind of trajectory under Unai Emery? They may well, but I guess that's a little bit of a gamble. Whereas Spurs, maybe last season aside, quite regular European involvement. Yes, Champions League hasn't been there for a few years. Conte's second year, so yeah, 2 years ago. But it has, if you look at the last 10 years, it has been a constant thing for Spurs. More often than not, they've actually been in Champions League, although it doesn't feel like it right now. So yeah, there's different ways of looking at it. And again, Villa lad, that would be a tough call kind of thing. But then I guess, would he get more regular game time? Probably he would, because he's a more ready-made player for the Premier League than someone like Archie Gray is. So it's probably an easier sell in that respect. So yeah, he's a fascinating one, because he's like I say, he's so young. People forget how young he is as well. I mean, they have had a need previously to get back into profit and sustainability kind of ballpark. It looks like the Douglas Luiz sale to Juventus is probably going to remedy that, and they're doing all of these deals. This is just mad, isn't it? They're the only clubs really, other than Brentford, to be fair, Brentford doing deals as well, who are kind of being very active, these PSR affected clubs, sorting out all these deals amongst themselves. There's like another potential one today I saw. I can't remember who it was now. But it's just, I mean, there's kind of trying to get through a loophole, and then there's like, lads, just having this mad scramble for each other's players. It's just incredible. And they're all kind of, like, so many of them kind of haven't really even played first team football. Oh, there's so much to it. It's going to be a really interesting one to kind of, if people start to really delve down into it, kind of a lot of the workings out around it and all. But yeah, so looks like Villa are sorted in that respect. So it's not a case of they have to just accept anything. But of course, we're at this stage now where everyone wants to, after July the 1st, get some kind of good, I guess, sales on their balance sheet, so then they can start with real confidence going into signing players and everything. So I think he makes a lot of sense for Spurs. He's versatile, he's highly rated, very talented young midfielder, and he's homegrown, of course. Something that Spurs don't have an absolute mass of right now. But again, it's whether Villa accept that, and whether the player accepts that as well. Spurs obviously do have a player that Unai Emery likes in Gio Lo Celso. He took him to Villarreal at the second half of 21-22 season, and then re-signed him the next season as well. But he then left for Villa anyway in October of that season. And yeah, Lo Celso's at the Copa America right now, so he's kind of deeply involved in that. But yeah, we'll see over the next couple of weeks or so whether that ends up being any kind of goer, or whether Lo Celso ends up heading back to Spain again, where he's obviously been at Betis and Villarreal as well. He's been back there a few times. So, but yeah, Spurs do have someone that Emery likes. Whether that plays any part or not, I don't know. Whether it end up, if they were to make a bid, it would be a straight cash thing. We'll find out. And I'm sure there'll be other interest in him as well. I wouldn't imagine Spurs would be the only one if there's any kind of acknowledgement that he could be prized away for a certain fee. But yeah, well, the way it works. Of course, we know Spurs, like Conor Gallagher, do understand that they still retain that strong interest in him. I presumed we'd be at a stage now where maybe it'd be like, it's probably not going to happen, but certainly seems to still be a very strong interest in him. Of course, if you're not aware, 24 years old, played 50 games last season for Mauricio Pochettino, majority of them as captain as well for Chelsea. And as of yet, certainly as of yesterday was the last time I asked, because obviously it's a different club, not one I cover. Chelsea had not entered into any official talks over a new contract for him, despite the fact he's only got 12 months left. And again, I guess what's happened this week too is that Chelsea look to be, under the insistence, it would seem, of Enzo Maresca, the new manager, bringing in his former Leicester midfielder, Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall. You would imagine that's with an idea of playing him quite regularly, and he does kind of play in that box-to-box role that's quite similar to Gallagher. So whether that has an impact on Gallagher remains to be seen. We don't know. This is the trouble. It's a bit unknown with Maresca, isn't it? He may well come in and just be like, no, I like Conor Gallagher, he's fantastic. And every kind of sense seems to be that Conor Gallagher would love to stay at Chelsea. I think that's his ideal thing. But ultimately, the club aren't offering him a new deal. And until that happens, the speculation is going to persist. And Tottenham, I guess, are going to keep hovering around in the background, tempting to go for him. Again, Villa were linked with him as well. It's different kind of views on this. Villa, of course, would be an attractive proposition, Champions League football. Some people have suggested maybe Conor Gallagher would like to stay in London, but that's not confirmed in any way whatsoever. There's so many aspects to it. Postecoglou's, we know he's a big admirer of Gallagher. Interestingly, he did his little ITV stint, which is done now, the 3 games, and in one of those he did actually have to speak about Gallagher. He spoke about his energy and how good he is at retaining the ball. And you're probably thinking in his head, he's thinking, I don't really want to talk about him. It's probably not one I want to be talking about because we've been linked with him. But yeah, we'll see what happens with Gallagher. Gallagher, ultimately, it's going to be down to, as it is everything, the selling club and then the player. I just find it very odd that they still haven't pinned or even started talks over a new deal. That's what my fellow Chelsea reporter at my work has told me. So, yeah, we'll see with Conor Gallagher. Talking of England internationals, it's really weird. The noises coming out of Crystal Palace about Eberechi Eze just appear to be not for sale this summer, which is certainly in kind of with the idea of Michael Elise heading to Bayern Munich, which still hasn't actually been done yet, but it seems to be on the way to being done. The fact that there's this real insistence, honestly, and it's everyone I've spoken to has been told by various people at Palace at all levels that Eze is not for sale, which does really throw spotlight on this reported release clause. That's the biggest thing I kind of took from it, because it's a really interesting one. No one seems to entirely know, this. No one seems to entirely know, I guess, what it's made up of. There's been some kind of speculation and potential ideas, but even speaking to people, no one seems to know a definitive answer on this release clause, other than everyone seems to say the same word, complicated. Some people have suggested maybe, and this is I think them just kind of guessing or little bits and pieces of gossip they've heard, that maybe it's a release clause that only talks about money up front. So it doesn't say that there's a certain value, but the buying club would have to pay a certain amount up front, and then but Palace still set the release clause value, which is a funny release clause because that would very much be in the club's interest, that release clause. It doesn't really kind of, maybe it's one of those where just that amount of money starts the ball rolling and you can even talk about it. I don't know. But then other people have suggested maybe there is an actual price tag. And it's, like I say, it's very strange, that one. But the fact that Palace are being kind of quite clear to people that he's not for sale, it seems to be, that kind of indicates that maybe the release clause is something that's more in their favour, or so complicated it's unlikely to be triggered. I don't know. But look, there's 2 months left. Could go any which way. That's the way it kind of works. But for now, everything about Eze seems to be a bit of a brick wall there. So yeah, we'll see if the next few weeks any bricks fall out of that wall. But I just thought that was strange, and I thought I'd mention that because it is everyone. It's not even like first or second source. Every person I've spoken to has been very clear that any conversations they've had with Palace, that's been the theme. And understandable, they're not going to want to lose even 2 of the 3 big names, with Gay as well. If you're going to lose Elise, obviously, yeah, you just don't. You don't want to lose 2 out of that 3, let alone 3 out of that 3. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of money coming in to rebuild a squad, but you don't want to lose your big players. It's quite an obvious thing. So, yeah, it would be lovely to kind of get more clarity on that release clause from somewhere. We shall find out. We shall. So another one that I know Spurs are very interested in is Rennes midfielder Desiree Doue. I don't know if that's pronounced like that. He only turned 19 this month. He is seen as one of the top young talents in France right now. Very versatile again. Can play, this season alone he's played centre midfield, left wing, right wing. He's played all over the shop. And he is seen as, an incredibly bright prospect. I think I've seen some potential price tags of about 35-40 million for him as well. He kind of became more of a regular starter for Rennes over the course of the season. The second half of the season, he started more games, got 8 goal involvements in the final 19 matches. He's one, I would say, keep an eye on various kind of clubs around him, but Spurs certainly, I know, have an interest in him and are quite keen on him. But again, it's about the player. It's about the player as well, and it's also about trying to get Rennes to part company with them. Spurs have got a good relationship with Rennes. They've dealt with them in the past over Joe Rodon, Jed Spence. So they've at least got that. But no, he's a very talented player. So keep an eye out for him. Like I say, there will be further options on the midfield shortlist. I have probably not even touched upon many on it, but they are certainly players that Spurs are interested in. Again, a lot of it data-driven, I would imagine, as well, with Johan Lang. That's certainly what I've been told as well. I guess just to stop the very expensive errors that Spurs have had in the past. This is the issue. Spurs have thrown quite reasonable money at a lot of players over the years, but some of them have ended up being huge flops. Tongi, I'm afraid we're kind of looking at you here. They've had to release him half a decade on for nothing. Mad, but there you go. Won't go down that road again. So talking about players maybe out the door as well. Mentioned Joe Rodon a couple of times during this. Leeds do remain in the hunt for him. Ipswich and Leicester, obviously Premier League teams now, beat Leeds to they got automatic promotion. They still have a strong interest in him as well, and apparently, from what I understand, there's a couple of other Premier League sides that are kind of sniffing around him too. Leicester do have, obviously, Steve Cooper in charge now, who worked with him at Swansea. I guess the issue with Leicester right now is they've got this likely, I suppose, points deduction coming up for the profit and sustainability rule breach. I've seen anything for that. People saying it could be anywhere between 6 and 15 points for them, so I don't know how that's going to work. But yeah, I think there'll be some other clubs probably come into the mix for him. He's had a terrific season, which is good for him, and it's probably good for Spurs as well, because it does mean you can have a little bit of a transfer battle in a way, which only kind of keeps that price nice and high. So keep an eye on Joe Rodon, that's one. I mentioned him earlier, Oliver Skipp. I do know that Daniel Farke at Leeds would love to have him again. Don't forget, at Norwich under him, he had a brilliant season. They won the championship. He played pretty much every minute until a late injury. He was just, fantastic for them. However, I would also kind of make it quite clear that Oliver Skipp, if he were to become available for transfer or loan, whatever, would have a lot of Premier League interest. And probably if I'm Oliver Skipp, I probably wouldn't move unless it's to a Premier League team, because he's played 107 times for Spurs, 77 appearances. 106. 106 times for Spurs, and I think it was 77 times in the Premier League. He doesn't need to drop down. I think there will be enough interest in him from a lot of Premier League clubs. But yeah. I mean, he played 21 matches last season, but he only had 7 starts, just 5 in the Premier League. So, I've said it before. He's quite keen to get regular football next season. I'm sure Premier League football too. But ultimately, with Skippy, it's going to be about whether Spurs decide they can allow him to go, because he is one of their very few club-trained players right now. Senior ones, anyway, over 21. So whether Spurs can kind of say to him, look, we will give you more game time in Europe and the cup competitions, and then we'll see where we're at in January, I don't know. Or whether they just think, okay, we'll let him go, and whether they even take a permanent deal, I don't know, perhaps. But that's a big call to make. It is. Talking of club-trained players, Troy Parrott does really very, very much look like he'll be heading out this summer. I've said before, AZ Alkmaar looked to be the most interested at this point, and I would imagine if he'd like to go anywhere, it probably is the place at this stage, unless someone else comes in that he will end up going to. I would hope that Spurs put in some kind of either buyback clause or sell-on clause or whatever for Troy, because I still think he's going to do very well. He's proved at Excelsior Rotterdam. The Eredivisie suits him very nicely. And I've no doubt that AZ Alkmaar looked at what he did. It scored 17 goals in total, 10 in the Eredivisie, 7 in the playoffs afterwards, and looked at that and thought, he's done that for a team that ended up getting relegated. What can he do for a team further up the table? And I just think his opportunity at Spurs has just kind of passed him by, unfortunately. It's probably just at that point where hasn't worked. Just hasn't quite worked for him in terms of opportunities. And maybe, I don't know, maybe just not quite being at the level that was required at the time for Spurs. He is still developing. He's still so young. Was he 22? There's so much more to come from his career. It's a shame if it's not going to be at Tottenham that he breaks through. But he's got to go away now and make a big kind of success of him as well. Talking of attacking players, Jamie Donnelly. Spurs are not, from what I understand, countenancing, looking at any potential permanent sale of Jamie Donnelly, but there is a growing feeling that he may head out on loan next season. Ultimately, it's down to Postecoglou. Postecoglou needs to have another little look at him in pre-season, unless a really, really good offer comes in. But from what I understand, I would imagine Birmingham are likely to be in the mix there. Chris Davies was a big fan of him, of Jamie. So they will be one. Oxford City, very keen as well. Oxford United, I mean. That's because I read a tweet earlier about a non-league team, Oxford City. I mean Oxford United. Oxford United, who are now a championship team after promotion last season. You've got a kind of if they were to end up being the two, I'm sure there'll be many others. From what I understand, there's a load of interest in Championship, League One for him. You've got a choice there. You've got going to Oxford in the Championship, who may struggle, they may not, but they are a promoted team. It's going to be difficult for them. Or you go to League One with a big hitter in Birmingham in that league who gets 21,000 each week at St Andrews. Or you go to Oxford, who I think they get about 9,000 each week. And it's not to say that should choose something on attendance, but I guess if you want to break through and become a Premier League player, I suppose maybe going to Birmingham with the expectation there of having to win every game and being the top side, having a bigger kind of expectant crowd, I guess, behind you or on your back, depending on the situation, maybe that's better preparation. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see if Postecoglou green lights a loan move for Jamie, which of those two, unless there are others, you'd go for. Let me know in the comments which of those two you'd pick. I do think having a manager in Chris Davies, knowing you, probably helps as well. And he is going to there's going to be a lot of people in his position next summer. Like I said, they're looking for further additions, and you've already got Bergvall coming in the door. Alfie Devine back from loan as well. That's not even to mention Mikey Moore, Tyrese Hall, young players like that as well, who Postecoglou really likes. So, yeah, there's a lot to think of, I think, for some of those young players in the academy. And if I'm Jamie Dolly, I think I've said this before, I probably would want to go out on loan for the season. Postecoglou may look at it and think, look, maybe I'll give him some minutes in the Europa League here and there, and then in January you can head off and get your loan move. But I think probably for his development, it's probably better just to go and get a regular week in, week out season of football somewhere. It's a difficult one because I know there's fans that look at that and think, no, he should be in the team, he should be playing, or he should be getting minutes from the bench at least. And I get that, you won't find many more advocates of the academy and getting academy players trying to play in the first team than me. But I also am quite an advocate of the right loan. Getting them out there and getting the proper football. Like Ashley Phillips. Ashley Phillips would not have got any football in the second half of last season. He didn't get any football for Spurs in the whole season. But the second half of the season went to Plymouth and got week in, week out almost football. Was their young player of the year. Brilliant move. Not every loan move has been brilliant. But again, Troy Parrott, as we've spoken about, had a terrific loan move. So I do think as long as you make the right choice over a loan move, it can be far better for a player's development than sticking around and getting minutes here and there. I really do feel that way, as you can tell. So yeah, it's just such a strange transfer window. Even doing these videos, it's like, I looked back at last summer and when the dates were, and I had someone ask me, I did a little Q&A for work today, and someone said, but last year they did early deals. Like, why have they not done that? Why have they come away from the plan? Why, Postecoglou wanted early signings. Why have they come away from the plan? But this is just such a different summer. There's so many different kind of impediments this summer around. There's been a lot of focus on the PSR deadline of June the 30th. Nobody wants to fall foul of it. As I said, I think in the last video, a lot of clubs are waiting for July the 1st to start doing deals because they don't want to, they do want to have those sales on that next season's accounts, so that immediately they're in a great position when they want to buy players too. It has really changed the way a lot of the clubs are thinking. That may be a good thing, you might feel. And then, of course, we've also got the Euros and Copa America that are throwing these big old, huge tournament-sized blocks. It's not to say that players aren't moving. They are still some of those players in those tournaments, but it does make it more difficult. Like, I've seen talk today of Anthony Gordon maybe going somewhere to help Newcastle out before the deadline. And I'm looking at it and thinking, how in the world is any transfer being sorted out before the end of June the 30th, which is tomorrow night? He's with England. He's got a match tomorrow. It's just like, I don't think that can be based in reality. I could be completely wrong. Over the next 24 hours, they may somehow do some kind of medical out there at St George's Park. But it just, St George's Park in Germany. I don't get it. I do feel like sometimes reports are, I don't know, are not taking into account a lot of things. But yeah, it is mad. See, even there, just as I'm doing this, there's another potential one going through. Brighton, 33 million. Yankuba Minte from Newcastle United. Some mad deals. Newcastle doing that to help their financial fair play status as well. That's another one. There's some interesting moves going around, and I saw there's Isaac talk as well. But I guess a club like Newcastle are probably going to want to let some of those other players head off before any of their star players. Of course you are. But it is fascinating. Spurs, of course, have not kicked into gear yet. And we'll see what the coming weeks bring. There's still, what have we got? 7, 8, it'll be a week today they'll start pre-season. So a week to go till pre-season starts. And then until they head off on the tour, obviously I think the tour they fly off something like the 22nd or something like that. So yeah, there's still a while left before pre-season's really up and running completely. But Spurs, I think, will start to kick into gear. I'm sure it isn't for the want of trying at the moment. But certainly, I think once July the 1st ticks around, I think you're going to see a lot more movement. There's this PSR movement right now. But I think from July 1st onwards, I think it turns into something a little bit different. And Tottenham, I would imagine, will be involved in that. They'll want to get at least one through the door, if not two, before pre-season really gets up and running. Because otherwise, you don't want Postecoglou getting a little bit kind of fed up with it all. Like I definitely remember back in 2019 with Pochettino on the tour. I still have flashbacks to how annoyed he was with just having Tongi through the door at that point, albeit a £60 million signing, who later would not end up being worth that money. But there you go. There you go. Right, so that's it really. That was it. It was just a kind of a quick update and talk about some of the midfielders and talk about any potential stuff with outgoings. And I think, like I say, I think next week I'll probably will try to continue these quite regular updates because I think there's going to be a lot more happening, both incoming and outgoing. I know some of the outgoings are currently at tournaments, but with knockout rounds approaching in the Copa America, I think they've still got... There's halfway through. I think they've just done the second round of games in the group stage. I think there's another round of group stage for them. Euros, of course, are in the knockout stages now, and players will start to... Hojbjerg, just after... it hasn't happened yet while I'm recording this. He's about to, no doubt, play against Germany. He could end up being out of the tournament, and then suddenly his future is there to be sorted out, and that could then could move quite quickly. So we'll see. So there you go. Loads of little bits and pieces spoken about, and there, hopefully, we have kind of more concrete stuff to properly discuss. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Anyway, stay safe, stay healthy, and look after yourselves. I shall catch you later. Goodbye.